So AI, it's a great tool, but it's not a replacement for proper development practices. Over the last 13 years, I've developed a certain way of coding things that has worked well for me. It's led to less production rewrites and less headaches along the way. And it's pretty simple and it's intuitive, but with AI, it's really easy to rush into these things and just start knocking out tasks, right? So what I've found though is you need to build small and you build slow and then you test along the way and then you end up with a much more robust product. Um, and that's what I did with this API here. So started working on this project, and we have a third party that we have to connect to, and they have an API, and their documentation isn't the best, which is not unusual. So kind of how I approach this project is, all right, well, let's get the connector set up. So we hooked everything up. So I hooked everything up, got connected, and then I got a developer test environment. That's really important, and that should be what you always push for. You never test in production. The AI will do it for you if you let it, but you don't want to test in production. So I made sure that there was a proper test environment where I could have test customers and test data. And I built the connection, and then we built out the database for the back end. And it's rough at this point, but that's what we wanted. We want the connection, we want the database, and then we want to start actually using the using the tool and see what it produces. And we got some interesting findings from that. So I came in and I got set up, and I hadn't used this before, and I had and the client, I'll say my partner, uh, walked through with me like what they usually do in here. Here's the calendar, and then we have contacts and patients and stuff like that and practitioners. But I'm going to focus mostly on the calendar part here. And so I got the lay of the land, and then from there started playing around with stuff. So adding an appointment, and one of the pain points that was mentioned was whenever we move an appointment. So you can actually add an appointment here, and you can drag it over to here, and it'll change the time, and then it sends emails, and it does all that. But there was a pain point in there, and I wanted to test it out. And then also you can come in here and just add appointments, and sometimes they were having to close one and reschedule it. And those are all test scenarios. So this whole process that I'm talking about here, like as you're building, you should also be building your regression test library. And all that means is we're at the very beginning of this process. And by the time we get to the end, we know how things should work. So we want to have a test set that works now and will work at the very end to make sure we didn't break anything along the way. So some of the interesting findings is these appointments. So what the AI leaned into right away is this last updated date, and the documentation it doesn't tell you when last updated fires. You actually have to get in here and try to break it like an end user. So moving the appointments around, adding a new one, canceling, rescheduling for the same patient, rescheduling within the time frame of their 24-hour notice email. Those are all test scenarios, and it's the boring, tedious part. But as you're doing this, you're able to do it. You can look at the database and see what's in there. And if you're not that familiar, with writing queries yet. You can ask your AI to be like, hey, what happened in the database when I did this? And the AI will help you. And that's the point where you're like, oh, well, show me the query and show me the table. Like, where's it getting recorded in? Because a lot of that stuff you can set up, you can lean into the AI to kind of set up some of those things in the beginning, but realize this is still prototyping. And you always want to prototype and iterate your process. So kind of what we found is actually when you added a brand new appointment, it had no last updated date. It had a created date, but then all of a sudden you move the appointment. Well, the created date doesn't really change, but it has a last updated date. So it's not as intuitive as just being able to read the documentation. You can't just point the AI at the documentation and say, oh, implement this thing, roll out to production, and then all of a sudden the client's missing appointments. That's the main takeaway from that part of it. So that's kind of what we learned through here. So yeah, so when it's first added, it has no last updated, so we can do a full sweep of the appointments and grab it. But after you drag it, it does get a last updated, and then we can poll it and we can kind of see what changed. And one of the features that the client was mentioning is that they don't have a good way to track as all these appointments get moved around. So we implemented this delta change so we know how many times this appointment got rescheduled, and we can do that for them and help them out. The second finding was kind of interesting, and this actually goes to the naming of the columns. So in the system, you have a bunch of patients where they're the clients, but when it comes back through the API, an emergency contact, it's actually labeled as a patient, but it actually has a different, what is it called? Oh, this value string, it's a contact instead of current. So we have this field of patient status that comes back, and a patient status is like current, sure, but you can tell they kind of just smashed in the emergency contact where it looks like a patient, but the status comes back as contact, and you know that that's a contact for the patient, and it's actually linked to it, and we can derive that. But just relying on the column names, you're not going to figure that out, and you got to get into the actual test environment and add some contacts, remove them. You got to do all the things of trying to break it like somebody's going to do in production. So what does all this mean? So for this is how I would start. I got a brand new API. I'm not familiar with how the program really works. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to play with it. I got a database set up, and I'm going to get a feel for how things track, which columns we're going to use, and that's how I would proceed with this. There was a few other things that we found out in this process, but those are the first two big ones so far. And really, this is just how I would think about tackling the problem. If you ask the AI, it would have a different opinion, and it probably wouldn't come back with this. What I found has worked with the AI is this architect builder kind of paradigm, and I kind of borrowed it from another YouTuber, but it's how I was doing it before. Just he put a name on it, this architect builder, but you kind of architect small steps. Like in the industry, they're called sprints, right? You want to have a small sprint, and usually what you get is like, oh, here's the story card of someone makes an appointment, and then this happens, and then that's your sprint to implement that story card. I never got into those shops that work like that. Like, small steps is how I think of it. And for AI, the architect builder is a good way to do it, because the architect will work with you and you'll kind of come up with, well, these are the requirements. These are the chunks I want to break it out to. And you can go back and forth with the architect. And then when it's time where you think you have good requirements, you say, okay, send the requirements to the builder, a different AI. The builder reads them with a fresh set of eyes. And then the builder comes back with their plan and says, all right, this is what I'm going to do. And then the architect looks at it with another fresh set of eyes and brings it back to me, the human in the loop, and says, all right, this is the plan. The human gives the final go ahead, and then we do it. And then it comes back, and then boom, we're kind of back where this video started, right? That's where the human's going in and testing it. And you can give the AI access into the test environment so it can click around and try and find all the things. But right now, there's no good list of everything that comes back in the patient status, like contact, current, what are some of the other ones? So we're going to have to see some customers and kind of see what's in there. We can try reaching out to the team, but it's not in the manual. They're not giving you a complete list of everything that's there. And you have to deal with all that. So what's the point of all this? So kind of where I'm landing in the space is, I've been doing this for a while, and I love that AI is giving new developers, I'll say, or giving users the ability to get out there and build things. And the lane I'm starting to narrow in on is using my knowledge to help people build.